The wind that moves across the Supe Valley carries fine quartz grains polished by the Pacific. It drifts against the northern face of the Pyramid Mayor, the largest of the 6 platform mounds that define the city of Caral. This is not the celebrated limestone architecture of the later Maya centers, where jungle humidity preserves carved stelae and where hidden corbelled chambers still guard calendrical inscriptions. This is an older and drier order. The Pyramid Mayor was built in successive stages of selected river cobbles and earthfill, faced with adobe bricks laid in precise courses and retained by stone walls battered at a calculated angle. At its base, on the western side, a corridor once gave access to lower internal chambers. Those entrances were blocked in antiquity with large dressed stones fitted without mortar and then covered by later construction phases. The desert has since added its own seal of wind-blown sand. Proposals to introduce endoscopic cameras or ground-penetrating arrays into the known blocked corridors have been submitted through official channels and returned with the same response. The main platform remains sealed beneath the encroaching sands. Access remains forbidden. In 1957, a Peruvian researcher named Dr. Antonio del Solar trained first as a mining surveyor before he turned to archaeology, received limited permission to conduct a topographic study of the Supe Valley mounds. He worked with a borrowed theodolite, a steel tape, and a notebook whose pages still carry the faint graphite of his calculations. Over 3 weeks, he recorded the diameter of the largest circular plaza as 48.6 meters, the offset distance from its center to the northern pyramid as 127.4 meters, at an azimuth 1.8 degrees east of true north, and the repeating intervals between the 6 principal platforms. He checked these intervals against the golden section ratio using a slide rule and noted that the progression held across 4 successive measurements. During a small unauthorized test excavation at the base of the western retaining wall, he exposed a single foundation block bearing incised linear marks, spaced at regular intervals. He photographed the stone with a Leica camera on expired film stock. The negative shows the marks clearly enough for measurement, 3 parallel lines crossed by a 4th at a precise angle. Del Solar included the photograph, the measurements, and his recommendation for further investigation of the lower levels in a formal report submitted to the National Registry in Lima. The file was stamped for internal review and placed in storage. Del Solar was reassigned to Highland Projects the following year. He died in 1974. The complete dossier, including the original negatives and the annotated pages describing the incised stone, remained unexamined until a pipe failure in the archive basement in 2015 forced an emergency relocation of boxes. A graduate student assisting the archivist opened the Del Solar file, recognized the significance of the alignment calculations and the stone photograph, and made 12 discrete images with a mobile phone before the box was moved to the restricted access section reserved for materials under cultural security review. Those images circulated briefly among a small group of researchers before one set reached an alternative history forum in 2018. The incised stone itself has never been re-exposed. For generations, the accepted account held that the first complex societies and monumental architecture in the Americas appeared in Mesoamerica with the Olmec and early Maya, or in the Andes with the Chavin Horizon after 900 BCE. The coastal Peruvian platform mounds were described as the product of gradual accumulation by small-scale fishing and farming communities whose social organization remained at the level of theocratic chiefdoms. Monumental construction was explained as the result of seasonal communal labor mobilized through shared ritual, rather than through any centralized administrative or technical system. When radiocarbon dates from Caral were published in the 1990s and refined in the early 2000s, the antiquity was acknowledged, but the interpretation remained conservative. The absence of writing, of metal tools beyond hammered copper, and of any obvious bureaucratic apparatus was taken as proof that the geometric order visible in the site plan could only be symbolic or ritual in nature. Textbooks and museum narratives continued to present the development of urbanism in the Western Hemisphere as a later and independent process, with Caral treated as an impressive but isolated exception that did not require revision of the broader sequence. When the spatial arrangement of Caral is read as the engineering and administrative document it appears to be, the plan reveals itself as a coherent operational system, rather than a collection of ritual platforms. The central axis of the largest sunken plaza aligns to within 0.2 degrees of true astronomical north, a tolerance that would have required either prolonged naked-eye observation of circumpolar stars over multiple seasons or the inheritance of an established surveying method. The intervals between the 6 major platforms follow a geometric progression governed by the ratio 1.618. The golden section maintained consistently across more than 380 meters of open terrain. Cross-sections through the principal access ramp show riser heights varying between 28 and 32 centimeters in a repeating sequence that matches the average loaded human stride. The overall gradient of 1 in 8.5 distributes the mass of the rubble fill to resist both seismic shear and seasonal sheet flooding from El Niño events. The production zones for dried fish and cotton are positioned downwind of the main residential clusters at distances that minimize odor, while the pathway widths between them are sufficient for two-way passage of laden porters. The modular residential sectors are spaced at intervals that correspond to multiples of a standard labor group size, creating a spatial encoding of administrative divisions that would have allowed resource tracking without written records. When these same measurements are overlaid on the reconstructed irrigation network of the valley, the canal gradients match the ramp gradients within 0.3%, indicating a single consistent standard applied to both monumental construction and hydraulic infrastructure. The labor investment required for the main platform alone, calculated from experimental rates of 0.8 cubic meters of fill per person day, reaches approximately 2.4 million person days. At a 120-day construction season, this implies sustained coordination of more than 20,000 individuals over 2 decades, a level of organization whose modular spatial template is precisely what the site plan encodes. The main platform remains sealed beneath the encroaching sands. Access remains forbidden. Independent sources repeat the same geometric and administrative logic at different scales. At Aspero, 20 kilometers downstream, platform constructions in earlier strata repeat the north-south axial preference within 0.4 degrees and apply reduced versions of the same proportional intervals. A 2017 drone mapping flight, commissioned as part of an environmental assessment, recorded 3 additional low mounds in the upper valley, whose interstructure distances matched the Caral golden section progression at exactly half scale. The complete data set was never deposited in the public archive and remains classified under heritage sensitivity protocols. A set of field drawings preserved in a private collection in Bordeaux, catalogued as Fonds Peru 1924 5S 03, was produced by a French hydraulic engineer working on irrigation rehabilitation. The drawings apply the identical proportional armature to a now eroded mound complex 12 kilometers inland and carry marginal notes describing divisions harmoniques du terrain pour le contrôle administratif. In 2023, a high-resolution photograph from a 2021 conservation inspection that was not intended for public release showed a previously undocumented alignment stone at the base of one platform bearing a drilled hole and incised line whose spacing and angle match the theodolite marks recorded in Del Solar's 1957 notebook. Geophysical and paleoclimatic data supply measurable confirmation of the operational reading. Ground-penetrating radar transects conducted under restricted permits in 2014 and 2018 revealed linear subsurface anomalies 1.2 meters wide at depths between 2.6 and 3.1 meters beneath the main plaza, forming a rectilinear grid consistent with deliberately excavated and backfilled foundation trenches containing selected cobbles. These features stabilize the structure against differential settlement and provide internal drainage during flood events. Paleoclimate reconstructions from lake sediments and ice cores, published between 2005 and 2015, document an abrupt increase in aridity and in the frequency of strong El Niño events beginning around 2000 BCE and intensifying during the final major construction phases at Caral. The irrigation system would have failed first in the upper valley, forcing abandonment to proceed from the center outward in a pattern that matches the spatial zoning of the site. Finite element acoustic modeling of the largest circular plaza, using its measured diameter and wall angles, produces focused zones of reinforced sound pressure between 82 and 118 Hz. The band most efficient for transmitting spoken directives or synchronized rhythmic signals across assemblies of several thousand without modern amplification. Experimental replication of the ramp gradient with volunteer porters carrying loads equivalent to ancient fill baskets shows a measurable reduction in fatigue compared with steeper or shallower slopes, confirming the ergonomic calculation embedded in the design. The restriction that has kept these details from wider examination follows 4 successive layers. In the centuries after abandonment, the platforms were not merely deserted. Later groups placed closing offerings and, in places, deliberately capped lower access corridors with fitted stone, as though neutralizing a functioning technical system rather than simply walking away from ruined monuments. The colonial religious layer deepened the erasure. 16th and 17th century Spanish chroniclers recorded indigenous references to ancient coastal cities, yet recast them as fables of giants or of peoples destroyed by divine judgment. Physical traces were either ignored or attributed to natural formations, while administrative policy moved populations away from the old valley centers under the reduction system. In the 19th century, the published reports of early scientific expeditions contained initial descriptions of the Supe mounds as immense artificial elevations of great antiquity. Yet the final illustrated volumes issued by European and North American institutions showed revised texts and redrawn plates that reduced both scale and apparent age as to fit gradualist models then current. The modern layer continues without break. A 2016 application by a European university consortium for LiDAR coverage of the full valley floor was denied on grounds of conservation priority and questioned internally for its theoretical framework. A 2019 request to insert an endoscopic camera into one documented blocked corridor was refused for alleged structural risk despite the non-invasive nature of the method. A 2023 proposal by a Peruvian-Japanese team for targeted ground-penetrating radar on the zones first identified by Del Solar was initially approved and then revoked after high review. Internal Ministry communications dated 2020 and cataloged under reference MINCU-DPC-2020-112, explicitly caution against any research line that might invite diffusionist or external origin interpretations. The permit for excavation of the foundational layers is still denied. The main platform remains sealed beneath the encroaching sands. Access remains forbidden, and then comes the part that stops the argument cold. The geometric canon, the acoustic engineering, the standardized template repeated across multiple sites, and the administrative encoding visible in the spatial zoning cannot be accounted for as the spontaneous local invention of a fishing and farming chiefdom operating in isolation. Caral stands instead as the visible late expression of a technical system already mature before it appeared on this coast. The disappearance around 1800 BCE coincides with the global 4.2 kilo-year aridification event that produced abrupt societal stress from the Nile to the Indus and across the Andes. The abandonment here was not a slow demographic decline, but a relatively rapid cessation of coordinated activity, as though the operators of the system had completed a mandate or been compelled to withdraw while deliberately sealing the most precise records of its operation. Now, here's where it gets active. The same pattern of rapid abandonment, followed by deliberate sealing and later institutional restriction, appears at other monumental centers across multiple continents within the same narrow window of centuries. The question is therefore no longer whether Caral was advanced for its time and place. The question is what prior knowledge system it was preserving and transmitting, and why that system appears to have gone dark almost simultaneously at key nodes around the world. This is the material that remains off-limits to independent verification. Every fragment that surfaces, whether from re-examined mid-century archives or from restricted imaging flights, encounters the same institutional boundary. You are watching this because the approved channels will not transmit it. Share this investigation with anyone who still believes the developmental timeline of the Americas is settled and complete. Subscribe so that these threads can be pursued wherever they lead, before the next cycle of access restrictions returns them to the archive. The story of Caral is not a regional footnote. It is a structural fault line running through the accepted account of how and when complex societies first appeared in this hemisphere. What precise knowledge was encoded in the alignments, the acoustic zones, the administrative modules, and the sealed lower corridors of Caral that made its abandonment so total and its rediscovery so carefully bounded? If that knowledge was not generated on the Peruvian coast but carried there already formed, where did its keepers originate, and to where did they disperse when the desert closed over the platforms? In the next investigation, we will follow the same geometric signatures to other suppressed horizons that appear to record the same response to the same global pressure. Until then, continue to ask what the shifting sands have been required to keep hidden. Subscribe now and refuse to concede the final word on what was once known.